Hi, Dean here, and today I'm going to show you how to install WordPress in a local environment. I'm also going to show you how to install multiple copies of WordPress in a local environment using a single database. These steps aren't as hard as you might think, so stay tuned and let's go ahead and get going. Okay, so here we are in the Linux desktop. Now, before I get started, just one thing, you need to make sure that you have the LAMP server installed on your machine. Now, the LAMP server is a package that is installed to allow you to run Apache, MySQL, and PHP engine in one. And those are the elements that are needed in order to run WordPress successfully. So you need to have the LAMP server installed on your machine. Now, if you don't have LAMP server installed, you can go ahead and click on the link right here. I created a video on how to install the LAMP server. And go ahead and click that link and go through the steps to install LAMP server. Now, once you have LAMP server installed, then you can come back here and follow along with me. So now that we know that that's out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so the first thing I want to do is I want to go into my file manager by clicking this folder here, and it's going to open up my file manager. And then what I want to do is I want to go into the file system here, and then I want to right click on the VAR folder and I want to say open as root. I'm going to type in my credentials. Okay, now we have the elevated privileges. You can see that it's got a red banner here. Lets us know we're in elevated privileges. Now I'm also going to go into the www folder and I want to create a new folder. And I'm going to call this site1.wordpress. Okay. And I'm also going to go into the that folder, and I'm going to create a subfolder, and I'm going to call this public_HTML. Okay. Now this is just a general structure that Apache uses. The public_HTML is the file folder that Apache normally would serve web pages from by default. So it's good to keep that structure in place. So now that we have our directory structure set up, we can go ahead and go into our Google Chrome, and now we want to download a copy of WordPress. So in order to do that, we want to go to www.wordpress.org. Now there are two websites. There's WordPress.org and there's WordPress.com. If you want to self-host like we're going to do here, you want to do WordPress.org and you want to download a copy of WordPress. Now if you don't want to self-host and you want to worry about someone else managing the WordPress hosting for you, WordPress.com was a website that was set up by the people that created WordPress to do just that. It's got some platforms that allow you to host, and just like any other hosting provider, but it's geared towards WordPress. So just make sure that you're going to WordPress.org, not WordPress.com, to find that if you want to download. So we're going to get WordPress by clicking the Get WordPress button, and then it's going to come into a new page and it's going to show you download WordPress. As of this video, WordPress 5.0.3 is the latest version of WordPress. When you see this video, most likely it'll be different, but just make sure you download the latest copy of WordPress by clicking that button, or whatever way WordPress has you download it now. And you'll see that the WordPress gets downloaded, a zip folder gets downloaded. And now what we want to do is we want to go back into our root, our file manager, and we want to go back into the file system, and we want to click on home, and we want to click on the folder, whatever username you are. Mine's Nino, so that's the folder I have, but your folder is going to be different based on your username for Linux. We'll click on that. Then what I want to do is I want to go into the downloads folder, and I want to right click on that WordPress zip, and I want to extract here, and it's going to create a copy of a WordPress folder. Opening that up, and you'll notice that you got all your WordPress files here. So what I want to do is I want to select all those. I want to go ahead and copy by Control-C, and then I want to go back to my file system, way back into the main file system, and I want to navigate back into my www folder, and I want to go back into my site WordPress folder, and then I want to go into my public HTML folder, and I want to paste them all there. Okay, so now we have our WordPress files and folders in our website structure. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to set up Apache to see this folder here. So one thing I got to do is I got to go back out to the main file system, and I click on the etc, and then I want to go to Apache. Now there's going to be a file folder in here called Sites Available. I want to drill into that, and you'll notice that there's a 000-default.conf. I want to right click that, I want to copy, and then I want to go ahead and paste that. It just creates a copy of that folder, that file. Now what I want to do is I want to edit this. First thing I want to do is I want to I want to rename it, and I want to call this site1.wordpress. You can call it whatever you want. I just like to call the same name as my directory. That way it keeps it easy for me to know which configuration file goes to which directory. So I suggest if you don't do that, just do the same thing. Keep it consistent. But I name mine site1.wordpress.com. So now what I want to do is I want to right click that, and I want to open with my text editor. And you notice that we have default settings here. Now the first thing I want to do here is I want to change my server admin email to dean@dean.com, or whatever email address you're using. I'm using my email address, but put your email address in. And if you have any questions, comments, or if you want to just contact me, feel free to use that email address. Send me an email to that email address, and I'll answer any questions or get back to you if I can. I also want to I want to change this folder to site1, or document root to site1.wordpress /public_HTML. So that's going to point the document root to that public_HTML folder that we added the WordPress files to. Okay, now one last thing is we also want the server name, so we can actually name our website when we navigate to it. And we're going to call this site1.wordpress.com. Okay, and that is pretty much all the configuration we need here for this. So go ahead and save this. Okay. Now I can close that out. Now we have our site1 configuration file created. Now what we want to do is we want to go in our terminal, and we want to go sudo a2 insight site1.wordpress.config, which is basically the same name as the configuration file that I just created. So we want to incite that into Apache to let Apache know that, hey, I got another website out here. So go ahead, and we're going to enter our credentials. Okay, and now it just says to reload, which we will do. And it's going to ask me credentials again, and so it says reloaded. And that website is, or Apache knows that there is a virtual host out there called site1.wordpress. Alright, one other thing we need to do before this all works is we need to go back to our etc folder, and we need to scroll down here, and we actually need to map our host. So when we actually type it in the web address, it's going to resolve. So there's a file down here called host, HOSTS, not these. You want to just make sure it's just a host file. We want to right click that, and want to hit open with text editor. And then what I want to do is I want to add another line here, and I want to type 127.0.0.1, hit tab, and do site1.wordpress. wordpress.com. All right, so that's going to know that if we type http://site1.wordpress.com, it's going to resolve to our WordPress folder that we set up as a virtual host. Okay, so let's go ahead and save that. And just for good measure, let's go ahead and restart Apache. Okay, so let's enter our credentials. And Apache is restarted. All right, so now what am I doing? Now, before we can run WordPress, we need to actually set up a database environment. So let's go ahead and type HTTP localhost /php, and actually it's already in there, php myadmin. And what that's going to do is that's going to bring you to the front end of the MySQL management console. And let's type our credentials. And now we are in the graphic interface PHP myadmin for MySQL. Now, first thing I want to do here is I want to go to databases, and I want to create a new database. I will call this WordPress. You can call it whatever you want, but I just call it WordPress to keep it, organized, to know what that database goes to. So we'll say WordPress. Okay. So now we go back to our home. So you see WordPress is down here. So let's go back to our home folder setting, and let's click on databases. Now what we want to do is we want to create a user that's tied to this database that has all privileges to allow us to interact with WordPress. So go over here to the WordPress database and hit check privileges, and we want to add a new user account. Okay, now we want to call this, you can call this anything, just make sure that you remember the name, because you're going to need that when you configure or set up WordPress for the for the first time. So just type a username. I'm going to type WordPress _DB user. Okay, and our host is going to be localhost, because right now we are just doing localhost. You can, if you're on a live server, obviously change that to whatever name your live server is. Our password, we want to change a password. I am going to do a generic password, because I do not want to show my real password. And then I am going to go down here and make sure that this grant all privileges on database WordPress, we're going to make sure that is checked, and it is. So we believe that this is all done. Yes, we are all set. So let's go ahead and click go, and you have added a new user. Now if we go back to the databases and we check our privileges, we will see that WordPress _DB user is tied to, it's a database specific, tied just to WordPress, and it has all privileges. Now the reason why I want a specific user base just tied to that database, because in the unlikely event that your configuration file does get exploited and malicious user does get your username, they won't get a global username, they'll get just a database specific username. So it's bad enough they'll be able to delete your WordPress web database, but if they have a global username that's tied to all these they can wreck your MySQL instance altogether. But because we're in a local environment, it's really not that big of an issue. I just like being secure by default, so I just, out of habit, I always do a database specific user in that case. Alright, so now that we have our database set up, our user set up, tied to it with all privileges, we can go ahead and get out of this. Oh, no, I don't want to. Nothing wrong with that. That's my virtual machine. All right, so let's go ahead and get out of this. And we can go ahead and get out of this. And we can go ahead and get out of this. And we can go ahead and get out of this. And we can go ahead and get out of this. And we can go ahead and get out of this. And we can go ahead and get out of this. And we can go ahead and get out of this. And we can go ahead and get out of this. And we can go ahead and get out of this. And we can go ahead and get out of this. And we can go ahead and get out of this. And we can go ahead and get out of this. And we can go ahead and get out of this. And we can go ahead and get out of this. And we can go ahead and get out of this. And we can go ahead and get out of this. And we can go ahead and get out of this. And we can go ahead and get out of this. And we can go ahead and get out of this. And we can go ahead and get out of this. And we can go ahead and get out of this. And we can go ahead and get out of this. And we can go ahead and get out of this. And we can go ahead and get out of this. And we can go ahead and get out of this. And we can go ahead and get out of this. And we Click out of that. And we can go ahead and click out of this as well because we're all done there. Now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and go back into Chrome, and I want to go HTTP, and I want to go site1.wordpress.com. And you'll notice that we go into WordPress for the same time it's going to our site1.wordpress.com, and it's going to the initial login screen or initial setup screen. And it's going to say, okay, there's a couple things you need to know: database name, database username, database password, database host, and table prefix. And like I said, when you created that user, I said make a note of it. This is why, because it's going to ask you what's your database name or what's your database username. Okay, so let's go ahead and click the Let's Go button, and let's go ahead and set up our database. So our database name was WordPress, which we set up, and our database username, if you remember, we said WordPress _DB user. Okay, and our password, like I said, I did a generic password, and it's actually password. Like I said, I would never use a real password. I would never use password as a real password. And our database host is localhost. So we got WordPress _DB user, super secret password, and localhost for our host. And now we got our table prefix. Now in this video I'm doing two videos. We're going to set up multiple WordPress sites on a single database, and it's really easy to do. But in order to make that happen, you actually have to have a unique prefix for each instance of WordPress. So in this case, let's just go ahead and do WP1 to distinguish that this is WordPress site 1 WordPress. And then when I create the second WordPress, I'll name it probably WordPress 2. But let's go ahead and click submit. We're all done, and you'll get this error. It's really not an error, it's just letting you know. Alright, what's happening here? Well, it says I can't write the WordPress config PHP file. And the reason being for that is by default when you created, and we'll go back into our file manager. Let's go back into our root, go back at open as root. Okay, and by default, and let me get the default details here and I can show you. Let's put on permissions. Alright, by default, when you created this WordPress website, the permissions are set to owner has everything, the group has read and execute, and all others have read and execute. Now if you notice, all others only has read and execute. It doesn't have write access. So when you're trying to write to this directory, it's not going to. Now in this case here, because when you're configuring WordPress for the first time, WordPress writes the configuration file right to the public HTML folder. So because you don't have write access, you're going to get that this error message. So let's go ahead and change that. So what we want to do is we want to right click on that public _HTML folder, and I want to click on properties, and I want to go ahead and hit the permissions, and where this all others, which is this third option, is for all others. So you got owner, you got the group, and you got all others. You see how it only says access files? You want to set create and delete files. Alright, so that will essentially allow you to have write access to that folder. So let's go ahead and click close, and close that as well, and let's go ahead and refresh. Alright, so now we get, okay, you're all set. Let's go ahead and run the installation. Okay, so now we come to another screen here, and we need to add a little bit more information. So we need a site name. So we're going to call this WordPress site 1, and we're going to test user. Okay, make a username, and we're going to do a very generic password. And because it's a weak password, there's a confirmation box that they want you to click to make sure you understand that you're using a weak password. And we also want to do a username. So I'll just do dean@deanforeign.com. And now this question here, it's unchecked by default. You're probably better off just keeping it unchecked by default, because basically what it's asking you is if you want to prevent search engines from indexing your site. Now, if you're running a public website that you want the world to see, you definitely don't want search engines to not index that. You want to try and, if anything, you want to try and increase your chances of getting indexed higher in the ranking on like engines like Google, Bing, and Yahoo. So just it's unchecked by default. Just keep it unchecked if you want to do a public website. The only reason why I think you would probably want to check that is if you have a private website that's not meant for public view. But other than that, just keep that unchecked. So let's go ahead and hit install. And this is going to run for a little bit. If you see the like little icon, on WordPress they should put like a better indication that it's doing something. Maybe like a splash screen. There's probably an active ticket out there. I'm sure someone else has put it in there, but you know, if you want to go ahead and check it, you can log tickets or errors. In fact, I'll probably do that at some point. Maybe log that with the WordPress team. That, you know, feature requests would be a good splash screen here, but after a while it does install. So what I was getting at is if you hit that button again while it's installing, you'll get an error message here, basically saying that there's duplicate database tables that it can't create. It will still install, it just gives you like a false error. But okay, so we are successfully installed here, and we can go ahead and log in. So let's go ahead and log in as test user. And I'll put our super secret password. Go ahead and test user. Okay. Alright, so we are logged into our main WordPress dashboard. You can see here you got all your settings and all that. You get posts, there's some test posts there. There's a default post. You get your theme set up. And yeah, pages. I don't know if there's any pages. There's a couple pages. You get a name dashboard. And if you go in here, you see there's a basic website installed. Now we can change these by selecting any one of these. So if I activate this, I'm going to view the site, and it changes. Alright, so let's go back to our dashboard. And one other thing I want to go ahead and show you is when we try and add stuff like themes, if we want to add a new theme, there's a couple of things we need to do out of the box. So if I go ahead and add a new theme, and I pick one of these guys, let's go pick this one. Click install. Alright, first thing is going to happen, it's going to show you a pop-up dialog asking you to provide your FTP credentials. But because we are on a local host, we really don't have any FTP. We're doing everything locally. So in order to get rid of this message, or on a local host, to prevent this from happening, let's minimize this, and let's go into our file manager. Oh, actually, I want to show you that I'm in the wrong thing here. Alright, so let's go down to our file manager here, and want our file system. I want to right click on the VAR file. I want to open that as root because I need root access to do this. So let's go ahead and get our root permissions. And I want to drill into my website by going www, then site1, then public HTML. And then I want to edit my config file. Okay, so I want to go down to where the define WP underscore debug. Now you can put this anywhere. I just like to put that together with that because you do change the debug information when you're debugging. So I like to keep stuff that I change together. So we can put this here. So we'll add another line, and we'll type fs underscore method. I think that stands for file system method. And I want to put direct. Okay, and I want to go ahead and save that. Okay, so that's saved. We can close this. We can close this. Actually, you know something? I want to keep this open. So let's go ahead and keep that open. So go back in as root. Keep that open. I just want to minimize that because I'm going to have to go back in that and show you that. Close that out. Alright, so now if I try and install this again, oh, actually, no, something I gotta refresh. Let me refresh my page here. What did I do? Alright, let's refresh. I think I hit the back button. Oh, okay. Alright, so let's refresh this and let's go ahead and install something new here. Now, if you see here, we got another issue. Now it's saying installation failed, could not create directory. And this is a good hint, could not create the directory. So that tells you that you're not able to write into a directory or create a directory inside. So it's a clear indication we have a further permissions issue here. So what I want to do is I want to go back into my WordPress folder. I want to drill into public HTML and get the details here so I can show you and put our permissions up. This WP content folder, now if you notice that all others are just read and execute. There is no write, which means it can't write content to the WP content. And that's why you're getting that you cannot write the directory. What we want to do here is we want to go ahead and right click the WP content folder, and I want to click properties, and we want to hit the permissions, and for all others I want to make sure I change the folder access to create and delete files, and I also want to actually do that on the read and write for the file access, just in case in themes we want to customize themes, we can do it without having an issue. So create and delete files for folder access and read write for the file access, and I want to apply that those permissions recursively. So I want to click apply permissions to enclosed files. I want to make sure that's clicked and let it apply recursively. And if you notice, now we have the W up here under the WP content folder. And now if you see, if I go into drill down, you see all the other folders within the directory have that permission, and well as the all others for the files has read write access, so you can actually write to the PHP file. Now these permissions are fine on a local machine because it's pretty much just you accessing it. But if you're doing this on a live environment, it's okay to have these permissions to like install stuff, but when you go live and you have everything up to date, you want to kind of lock those down. You don't want to kind of have those permissions set to read write out in the open on the live websites. And actually at the end I will go over I'll go over steps you can take to secure WordPress a little better. So stay tuned for that one. Anyway, so let's get out of this. I think we're all set here. Alright, and let's go ahead and refresh this again, and let's go down to try and install that theme once again. So now you notice now it's installed. All right. So if we go up to actually, let's go ahead and activate it. So click go ahead and activate, and we'll visit site. Now you notice that it has changed significantly to a different theme. Now you notice again it's pretty vanilla. And that's only because when you look at the themes in the display, these are just screenshots. I do hit the about page, I guess. Yeah, these are just screenshots that are taken after the page had some content in it. So what you see is not really what you get in that case. You just got to add the content to make it look prettier. All right, so that's pretty much, in essence, a WordPress install on a local machine. Now, as I said earlier, those permissions issues, they can create kind of an issue on a live environment. And there's some steps that you can take to kind of tighten your security down on a WordPress. And I just want to go through that quickly with you a little bit. All right, so what I want to do is first I want to actually, all right, I want to get out of here. I want to get out of my Chrome altogether. Now, first thing I want to do is let's go back into our file manager, or file system. And I want to right click on my VAR folder. I want to make sure I have root access. And let's get that in. Alright, I have elevated privileges. Now I want to drill into my www folder. I want to drill into my site1 and my public_HTML. And let's go ahead and get the details view on this, and let's set up some permission. Show the permissions. Okay, so the first thing that we have is when we configured our config file, we had to enable read-write access for all users. Now, on a live site, there's a couple things you want to do with this WP config file. All right, first off, I want to actually change those permissions back to all others. I just want to read only on that. So let's go ahead and actually, something, we do that with the group too. So, all right, so read only on the access, read only on the group, and go ahead and hit close. Okay, now one additional thing is in the event, and it's highly unlikely it'll happen, but it can happen. If your web server that you have, if there's a problem with the PHP engine and it's not rendering PHP correctly, what will happen is PHP files will be displayed as the raw source text files in the browser window. So if the PHP engine's not working, instead of rendering the PHP, it'll render the page and showing just the main regular text. So in the case of the configuration file, you see you have WordPress, you have your WordPress user, you have your password, and you have your host name. Now, in the hands of a malicious user, this is absolute gold. They can use that information to access your database. And it's the reason why I said earlier when I was setting up the database user that you should only have that user accessible just to that WordPress database. That way there, if they do get a hold of your username, they'll only be able to wreak havoc on that one database, which is bad enough. But if you have a global database user for the WordPress database, they can use that username to kind of mess up all your other databases as well. So that's why I said you should only have a database user specific for that database. Okay, so one other thing you can do here is, because this gets rendered as a text file. So if I'm a malicious user and I see something like this, I'm going to find one. So if I go ahead and see something like this pop up in my browser window, or better yet, if I see something like this, let's go to themes, let's go this. If I see something like this pop up, and I know about WordPress, if I see something like this, and I see get header, if have post, post loop, that cues me in that I'm actually working with WordPress here, or I'm seeing a WordPress enabled website. And I was like, hey, wow, this is in text. Let me go see if I can't see what the WP config is. And then I just changed the file name to wp-config PHP, and then it'll show that text file. What you can do is, let me go back down to our main public HTML. What I can do is I can take this WP config file, I can right click this, I can go ahead and cut it out of our public HTML folder, and I can just move it above it, to the level above it. So you got your public HTML file here, folder here that serves the web page, but you get your WP config file here, right inside the root. So now this WP config file is not even visible to Apache's public HTML. So when it serves pages, if a user is going to try and type in wp-config, he's not going to find it because it's Apache's looking here. Now by default, WordPress says, okay, if I can't find the file here, let me look outside to here. And you'll notice that it works just fine. If I go back into my web page and I go site 1, you notice that WordPress is still working. I can actually go WP admin. And the WP admin allows me to log in. You know, allows me to log in fine. So moving that config file up above the public HTML has absolutely no effect on the web page not working. It'll work just fine. It's a good security measure to take to prevent someone from seeing your config file if by chance the WP engine is not working correctly. All right, so one other thing we want to do is, if you notice, when we put in our themes, we had to change our permissions on the themes to read, write, executable on all others. Now in a live environment, we just want to make sure that we change this back. So go ahead and click on properties, hit the permissions, and I want to do access files, and I just want to apply those recursively. Now if you notice that now when I go in, all my folders are just read executable for all others. And actually I gotta go back in because I'm still seeing read write on the index for that. So let's go ahead and redo that. So go back into WP content, hit properties, hit permissions, so access, and I want to set that to read only. And now we hit close. Alright, now you see that all your files have read access, all your folders have read and execute. And just verify that the other folders are looking like that too. And they are. So we're good security wise. We have our configuration file moved above our public_HTML folder, and we have our permissions set where the content's not writable. Just in case someone does have access to that folder, they're not going to be able to write your overwrite your files. So that is pretty much how to set up a single instance of WordPress. Now, what if you want to have multiple copies of WordPress running in the single database? In other words, what if you want to set up multiple websites using WordPress on your local environment? Well, WordPress has a way of isolating each database table schema for WordPress, and that goes back to that prefix that we set up in the beginning. So let's go ahead and show you how we would set up another copy of WordPress in this local environment. So let me get out of here and get out of this. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to go back to my file system. So drill into file system. I want to right click on the VAR folder. I want to open that as root. Okay, so I'm here as root, and I want to go into the www folder. Now what I want to do is kind of the same process as I did with the first site. I want to create a new folder. I'm going to call this site2.wordpress. Right, and I want to go inside there, and I'm going to create a new folder called public HTML. Okay, and then what I want to do is I want to go back to where I had my copy of WordPress, which in my case is in the downloads folder, and I want to right click all the files and want to copy those and go back to my public HTML folder of WordPress, and I want to just paste that there. Okay. Alright, so now we got that installed, that copied over. Now what we want to do is we want to back to this file system, and we want to go to the etc folder, and when I go into Apache, and I want to go into the sites available, and let's go ahead and copy this configuration from site 1, and we'll copy this and go ahead and paste that into the same folder, and let's go ahead and rename this to, let's see if you can guess, site2.wordpress. Good job. Alright, so now we got our site 2 configuration, but we got to change it now because we only have, it's only a copy, so it's going to point to our root folder for document for our site 1. So we got to change this information. So we're going to change this to site 2 and change the server name to site 2. And go ahead and save that. Okay. And then what I want to do is I want to open up a terminal here. And when I type in sudo a2 insight site2.wordpress.configuration, CONF. Ask me for my credentials, which I will put in, and then we reload. Okay. Alright, so that queues that configuration file up. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to get out of my terminal. I want to go back over the etc folder, and I want to scroll down to that host file again, and I want to right click that, and I want to edit with my text editor. Then what I want to do is I want to go 127.0.0.1 site 2.1. Okay, and we go ahead and save that. Now we are going to run into the same issues as with the permissions on the configuration, so we got to kind of relax the permissions on our WordPress folder. So let's go back into our file system. Now drill back down to our VAR, our www, and let me get the details view on that. And let me put in the permissions here so we know where we're at. Okay, and let's drill down into public, and as you can see, we're going to have that same issue right in the config file because we have read and execute. So let's right click the public HTML. Let's click on properties, and we're going to change the folder access to create and delete. Okay, so now we should be all set when we run this. We should be able to create our config problem with no problem. I'm not gonna change the permissions for the content because I'm just going to show you how we're setting this up. I'm not changing. But like I said, anytime you want to make changes to your theme, or you want to add a theme or plugins, just going to make sure these are set as well. And again, if you put this on a live site, you want to make sure that you put these permissions back to read, execute, and read. It's just good practice. Alright, so let's go ahead and try navigating over to our new website. So let's go site2.wordpress.com. And bingo, we are at the same introduction page that we've had before. Now let's go ahead and let's go. We're going to use the WordPress database, our database name. I'm going to use my same WordPress database user that I used before. Super secret password. It's going to be localhost, but here's where you're going to change per instance. Our last installation we had WP1 to reference WordPress 1. Now this is going to be a separate WordPress copy, so let's go WP2 on this. Now you can change this to whatever you want, and it's always good to include the underscore. That way it separates that name from the actual table name. You just want to make sure whatever you name it is, one, unique to all the other WordPress instances, and to make sure that's something that you would identify the database schema with. So just make sure that you have those two things taken care of. So the WP2, and we can go ahead and click submit. And we should be able to run the installation now, no problem. And it's going to ask me for some more information here. So we're going to put WordPress site 2. And keep test user, and let's create a super secret password. Okay, and we'll confirm the use of that because it's a weak password. Keep this unchecked because I want my website to be public. And oh, I didn't put an email address. Put an email address. I'm going to recheck to confirm again, and install WordPress. And again, it's going to chug along. Don't click this again because you'll get like a little false error message, but it's chugging. It's going along, and you'll get a message when it's set up, letting you know that you are successfully installed. It just takes a few seconds. And there we go. So we have the successfully installed message. We can go ahead and log in. Log in as test user. And you can see we're back at our dashboard, and we got our site 2. And let's go ahead and I'll show you. We can actually activate a theme. So let's activate one theme for this so you can see where it's two different installs. So let's go ahead and activate the 2017 theme on this. Okay. And you know something, just for good measure, let's go ahead and add a new post. So let's go. Oh. Okay, so we got our sample post here. So we can go in, visit the site. Say site 2 post, greetings from site 2. So this is coming from site 2. Now if I go back over to site 1, you'll see that we have our site 1 sample page. And again, we can go into our admin panel, and this is really all isolated to just site 1. You don't see the data from site 2 because they are actually two different installs using two different database schemes. So let's do site 1 post. Okay. In from Let's publish that. Okay. And I'll probably do a video series on WordPress basics, just setting WordPress up. That'll probably be a video I do in the future. As you see here, we got Site 1 post, greetings from Site 1, and again, if I go over to Site 2, we got a whole separate theme set up, and Site 2. So we actually now we have 2 unique WordPress installations running on a single database. And you know something? Let me show you the database schema real quick, and I'll show you what WordPress did in the background to make this work. Okay, so we're in our MySQL PHP MyAdmin panel. Now, if you notice that our first site, we have WP1 underscore, and you have all the table names. Now, from here to here are the core database tables that WordPress uses. You get your comments, you get your posts, you get users table, you get your taxonomy, relationships, all that good stuff. Posts actually pages are wrapped into post matter. But then you see down here, it repeats itself, and you have WP2. Well, that's basically what WordPress did in the background when it installed. That prefix that you set, it just added that to the table structure when WordPress set up the database. So that's how it allows WordPress to put several WordPress installations in a single database. And that's good to, so you can have multiple, as many as you want. Just make sure, again, when you set that prefix, just make sure, one, it's a prefix that you understand, that which site it goes to, and good idea to just separate it with a divider between the table and the prefix. Like by default it uses underscore, but you can change it to a dash or something that you would like to see. Just, it's always good to have a separator between the prefix and the table name. So that's pretty much it. So you have both you were able to set up a single installation of WordPress, and also a multiple instances of WordPress. You also learned about some of the security measures to take when your site goes live, and that should get you up and going. And play around with it. It's actually easier than what it seems, but it's pretty good. So anyway, that's all I have for today. Like I said, I'm probably going to be doing a video on WordPress basics in the future, so just stay tuned. If you like this video, go ahead and hit the like button. Hey, even if you don't like it, you can hit the dislike button. But tell me what you don't like about it. That way I can make it better. If you want to send me feedback or comments, you can send me email at dean@deanforeign.com, or you can just post right in the comment section, and I'll answer those there. If you want to see future updates, like when I do that video on the WordPress basics tutorial, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, and I will put out notifications when I post new content or new video series. Like I said, I'm just getting started with this channel, so it's pretty late right now, but I will be putting more videos as time goes on, and I hope to build quite a good library of useful information that you can use. So until then, happy coding.